Hey guys, we are back and still moving through Genesis, the first book of the Bible. We have reached chapter 16. We are going to cover the entire chapter, and that's verses 1 through 16. And this we have just had in the last chapter, Abram have a conversation with God, and they talk about how he's not going to have a servant be his heir, that he is literally going to have a child, and he is going to be the father of a multitude. This time he uses the stars in the sky to show how great it's going to be. And God also gives him the parameters of his land. He gave him the boundaries of where this land is going to be that's going to support this multitude of descendants that are going to come from him. And so there is a point of worship even in that space, because Abram always worships God whenever there is the mention or discussion of a promise, and he believes no matter how impossible it is. And so we see here in Genesis 16, verse 1, that Abram's wife Sarai has no children. She cannot have children. They've been together for a long time, and it's just not happening. And it is understood that she is barren or infertile. And she has an Egyptian servant, a handmaiden, or a slave girl, depending on which version you're reading in the Bible. Remember, this is not American slavery that we're used to. This is servants. This is like having a housekeeper or a personal assistant or something like that. And this woman's name is Hagar. And Sarai says to Abram, says, look, God has prevented me from having kids. Because God, remember, set stuff into motion way back in the days of creation. He said, be fruitful and multiply. And God has interrupted her ability to be able to be fruitful and multiply. She says, look, it's just not going to happen for me. So you can have this servant of mine, this handmaid of mine, and you will obtain children through her. And this, while it is not our culture, is the culture for some places at this time, is that if you are barren, you will bring in another wife who will bring children into the household, because this is considered a household, not her kids and my kids, but a household. These are the children of my husband. Therefore, I'm co-parenting in this process. This was a means of surrogate in some situations. This is a means of adoption, or this is their way of bringing children into the house. And while it is not the way we do things now, they didn't have in vitro and they didn't have all these other options. So this is how they did that. You would get someone else to come in to bear children for the family. And so the goal is that she would be, in the original conversation, like a surrogate. We see that something different happens. So I'm going to need everybody to take off your American mindsets. Don't think about your personal husband or your personal man or your personal wife. Don't think about this personally. I want you to think about it in the context that it's happening. And so it says that Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. He had been listening to God on this promise. He had been listening to God when it was time to walk. He was listening to God when God kept saying, you're going to have an heir. He listened to God. And now he has listened to Sarai. And his wife, while I don't think is a bad person, I think his wife had been with him for a long time. They had been through some things. And she understood that God is promising something that she doesn't have the ability, the capability, the might, the strength, the physical prowess to be able to do. She can't do the thing that God is promising. And what she did was she limited God to what she has between her ears, her own mind, her own physical being. She limited God to what she had, not to what God is capable of. And Abraham listened. And so it says in verse 3, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, remember they were traveling and they were moving things. They're letting us know there's a passage of time and that Abram is now much older. So he has waited on this promise from God at least 10 years at this point. Just in this block is 10 years because they've been in Canaan this time. He's been wandering for some time, and it has been at least 10 additional years from the time that God gave him the promise. And it says that Hagar, the Egyptian, or the slave girl, the servant, the handmaid, depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, they call her lots of different things. Abram's wife brings her. So Sarai brings her to him and gives him to her husband, Abram, as a wife. as a wife. And I've heard this described a whole lot of different ways. One, first, God is not condoning rape. At no point did it say that she held her down. Like we all watched The Handmaid's Tale. She held her down and it was this weird little ritual where everybody was in a room together. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. This is not something that was outside of this. This was not that type of situation. God is not going to ever condone rape. He does not. It is not any of these other weird situations where she comes and she has to bear this baby and get this baby away and can never look at it and never be a mother to this child. And, this is like a forced pregnancy and a forced adoption. This ain't that. This is not what this is. Gave her to her husband as a wife. I've also been told that anytime a man sleeps with a woman and knows her, it's his wife. And I don't believe that, because I've seen situations even a little bit later in Genesis where there is a situation where a man forces himself on a woman and that is not his wife. He still went to her father to ask for her hand in marriage. It doesn't make her your wife. So she gave her as his wife. And so I looked it up to do a little research on it and make sure that I'm not just out here with my own little brain trying to decide what women have and what they don't have and what stuff means. But the wife that's used here is the same word wife that's referred to as Sarai. They're equals in being a wife. And it's the same word used when Adam names Eve and calls her his wife. This is a wife. She is equal status. This is not a concubine. This is another wife. He is now at this point has 2 wives. Now, does God condone having 2 wives? There's a whole lot of conversation about it. So I'm not going to get into the deep of it because we're focusing on this. Just because God allows it doesn't mean he agrees. Just because God allows it doesn't mean he agrees. So we're going to dig deep into that a little bit later when we get into multiple wives. But for this, we're going to focus on Hagar. So Hagar is now being elevated from the position of servant, and especially a servant who was close to Sarai. This is her handmaid. This is the person who's with her at all times. They cook meals together. They wash clothes together. They make plans together. They talk together. They are friends. She knows her. So this is like bringing your personal assistant, your best friend in, and your best friend now is having a relationship with your husband. Now, all of my secrets, all the times I was like, oh, his feet stink and he snores at night and I wish he would go somewhere. All of that is now sitting in the room next to my husband. So you can kind of understand the tension at times. Because now all of my innermost secrets are right here. And now I'm worried about what I actually said when I was mad. So she is a wife. They're equals as wives at this point. And in verse 4, it says that she conceived. And when she saw that she conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. It says that she despised her. This is, she no longer sees the value in her. At this point, we became equals as wives to this man. And I have a child. So I bumped my status a little bit more. She doesn't, despised is not always hated. Sometimes it's that I just don't see the value in you. You now are the servant. In her eyes, they've switched places. In Hagar's eyes, they've kind of switched places. And so in verse 5, Sarai says to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. So she said, hey, take my servant, have a baby with her, and gives her to her husband as a wife. Not as a surrogate who's going to be here just for this baby, for this weird kind of forced handmaid situation, but as a wife. And when it happened, she's like, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And she's treating me funny. Now she's looking at me different. This was a bad idea. And you should have said something and not let this happen. It's your fault. She decided that this is your fault. I gave her to you. And when she conceived, she started acting funny. Now she acting funny. She don't want to do what she used to do. May God judge between you and me. May God figure out who's at fault here. May God look at this and determine that you're wrong. Because that's what she's saying. She's saying, yo, I feel like you messed up on this. You ain't have to listen to me. I've said that to my husband a bunch of times. I have said, hey, you got to turn here because we got to do this. He'll say no. I was like, no, you got to do this when we get in this wrong way. You shouldn't have listened. You shouldn't have listened. Like, she just flipped it on him. You were the idea man here, friend. You should have thought this one through. And so she is upset, and she goes to her husband and is like, look, you got to do something about this, because she's out of pocket now. She don't know how to act no more. And Abram was like, look, this is your servant. Like, this was your friend in the beginning. This was your idea. You do what you feel is right. You handle this situation, because you're not going to keep putting me in the middle of something that was your idea. Like, you orchestrated this. You're the boss here. So don't put me in the middle of it now. You keep being the boss. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and Hagar ran away. Now, I was told that she beat her. I don't know about beating, because I didn't see that. It didn't say she struck her. It didn't say any of those things in my studies. But it says she dealt harshly with her. And she might have said, oh, you acting funny? Remember, you my servant. And it had this pregnant girl sitting and scrubbing floors, or had this girl scrubbing clothes, or whatever it was. That was so unbearable to her. She's like, it's better if I don't be here. It's better if I'm not here. And Hagar runs away. And when she runs away from her, she's just gone. She out. And she runs and she goes and finds refuge by this spring of water. And she is on her way back home. She's like, I don't need none of this. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home. I'm not dealing with this. And an angel of the Lord finds her. Sometimes when you give up and abandon your mission, anytime you get caught up in a situation that you feel ain't right, God is still looking for you. Just because you ran off doesn't mean that God is not looking for you. It doesn't mean that God don't have somebody out there praying for you and pulling that you come through. So he gets to her and he says, Hagar. Not just her name, but Sarai's maid. I know you. And not only do I know you know you. He explained exactly who she was, connected her to where she came from, so she would know exactly that this is someone who knows her. He already knows the answer. He already knows the answer. When God asks us questions, he already knows the answer. Every time we've seen God ask a question, he already knows the answer. And what he asked is, where have you come from? If you know that I'm Sarai's maid, you know where I came from. You know exactly what this is. And he said, where have you come from and where are you going? Anytime God asks a question, he knows the answer. She said, I'm running away from my mistress. I'm running away from Sarai. So he called her by her name. So he acknowledged that he knew her. And asked her, he called her by her position. You're the servant of Sarai. You're the handmaid of Sarai. Where are you coming from? I know that. Where are you going? She didn't even have an answer to that. She ain't had no plan. She was just running. Stop running. Stop running. Especially if you ain't got no plan, nowhere to go. You just jogging. You just running for no reason. And so the angel of the Lord says, go on back and submit to her. Go on back. Go on back. Remember your position. Go on back. But he gives her a promise. He tells her something. And God is not ever going to have you in a situation where you have to endure something without the promise of better. God is not going to say that life is going to be easy. He's not going to be like, oh, she acting a fool. Boop, life is great. No, sometimes you got to walk out some difficult situations. Sometimes you have to be in some really, really bad things. We heard just a chapter ago that the nation that's going to come from Abram is going to be oppressed for 400 years. Sometimes you're going to live out some really, really hard, horrible, miserable situations. But there is always a promise attached to the suffering. And so in verse 10, he says, I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted. It's going to be so much it can't be counted. It's a nation coming through you as well. This is a multitude of people through you as well. He has promised her something specific based on this child that she carries. In verse 11, you have conceived and shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He promised her a son. which is all the rage. Like this is the goal of having babies, is to have boys, because there's a lineage and a legacy there. They are not sent away from their father's house, but they continue their father's house. They continue their father's line. They continue the name. Daughters, even now, we change our names, we move into other houses. Most of us, when we have churches, we leave our church and go join our husband's church. If we didn't meet in the same place, we form our lives to fit this new vision that God has made us a part of. We leave our father's vision for his household and go fit into another vision for another household. And our position changes. Our value is different, but absolutely, we don't take all of our stuff across. We give away our names. When I say we lose them, we give them away. And we take on a new name. And so here he's promising her the same thing he promised Abram. There's going to be a legacy. There's going to be a nation. God hears you and understands that you're going through something. And there's a promise for it. And it says that he's going to be a wild man. He is not going to be mild, meek, timid. He is going to be a man's man. He's going to dwell in the presence of his brethren. He's going to be around people and consistently battle for his position. He's going to be a fighter among men. If we had to look at Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, he's a little on the Malcolm X side. This is where he's going to be. He's going to be a little on the Nation of Islam. He's going to have a voice. He's going to have a stance. He's going to be strong and firm in what he does. Whereas Martin Luther King was definitely not soft in what he did. He just had a very different approach. This one felt like this. This one felt like this. So it's not that it's different. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. And so God is promising her that you're going to have a man that's going to stand on something. You're going to give birth to a son that's going to carry a nation on his back. And so this Egyptian girl who does not share the culture and the religion of the household that she's running from worships God. In verse 13, she calls him El-Roi because she's seen God. I saw you, Lord, and you saw me, God. And so in verse 15, it says that she bore Abram a son, and they named him Ishmael as she was instructed. And Abram was 86 years old when that child was born. 86. 86 when he had a baby. Y'all don't know if y'all ever had to reach into a crib and pick a baby up. Oh, Lord, with an 86-year-old back, Jesus. So I'm going to recap really quickly. This one is where we meet Ishmael's parents. So after God gives Abram a vision to show him that there's going to be an heir, Sarai has the idea to give him her Egyptian handmaid as a wife who is going to bear this child. And they're going to have a child in their household who will be an actual heir for Abram. And once this woman is pregnant, she was like, look, clearly I'm more valuable as a wife. I'm pregnant. Let me put my feet up. You go ahead and clean this stuff. You go ahead and make dinner. I'm a rest of it. And so they have a little skirmish. They have a little altercation. I don't think it's physical, but I think they got into it. I think they argued a lot because everybody wanted something different. Everybody was expecting something different. And so what we see is after a while, she decides it's too much and Hagar runs. And when she runs away, she's sitting by a spring and an angel of the Lord comes and there's a conversation between her and the Lord through this angel. Conversation between her and the Lord through this angel. And this angel tells her that you're going to have a son. And this son is going to be called Ishmael. So go on back, do what you got to do, submit to her. Don't get the big head. I know you're pregnant. Just make it work. And just make this work. There's a promise for you in the middle of this. And that your son is going to be a wild man who stands on something. He's not going to be peaceful. He's not just going to go with the flow. He's absolutely going to be a man's man. And I want you to know that this is going to be a great nation This is going to be huge for you. There is going to be a multitude, and you're going to be so richly blessed from having this child, and it's going to be okay. But just going back, and he says to her to just submit to your mistress. It's gonna work out in the end. Just had a peace. Just go ahead and deal with it. And she calls God El-Roi. That I've seen God and God has seen me. She feels seen. She feels heard. You know how valuable that is sometimes to a woman to just feel seen, acknowledged, and for someone to just recognize the pain that you're in. Even if I got to stay in it, just somebody to really understand the pain that I'm feeling. Just acknowledge it, that I'm in the fight with you, that I'm in this fight on my own. Just acknowledge it. And that's what God does for her. He acknowledges her. He sees her. He lets her know, even in the midst of all of this foolishness, everything that's going on around you. And she worships a God that she's not familiar with, that she's heard of from these other people. And then she goes back. She submits. She does what she needs to do. And Abram was 86 years old when this child is born. So you guys remember, when you are in a situation, when you are in a fight, when you are just running away, if you ain't got nowhere to go, you ain't supposed to be running. And God will see you. He hears you. He is near you. And there is a promise in the end for the pain you have to endure. All right, guys, go be blessed.